squares are?
Yep.
No.
Okay. Okay.
Over the side.
I see Tim and Sandy.
There you go.
We just
But
want to see him.
when he shares his screen.
I'm not here. I'm not sure what side. And it was recording.
Hey, Tim and Sandy.
Hello.
Oh, that would help.
And Wendy.
It would help our.
Obar.
Hey, class.
Hello.
I see Keith Sheldon.
Keith and Marianne are here.
Wow.
Hey, Marianne.
Hey, Mike.
And we've got somebody dialing in by phone. I'm assuming that's my good friend Carol.
No, it's Patty.
Oh,
No.
okay.
Wow, Patty. Woohoo.
Ah,
Let's see, who else? Class, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Doing well. Is Angela there with you?
Yeah, she's just walked into the room now.
Okay, welcome. And
Thank
I see
you.
Sam and Elaine.
big group.
Yeah, all my arm twisting paid off this time, I understand.
Well, you promised free beer.
The free beer, yes,
Yeah.
but you have to come in person. So
Oh, man. I can't drink beer anyway. So.
Sharon's already 3 sheets to the wind here.
Right.
The Sacramento wine.
This might be Carol joining us.
It is.
Hey, Carol, thank you for joining.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Carol.
Hi. Hello.
Oh, okay.
And the pastor has joined us. Thank you for. Oh, he was here.
This can move closer.
No, I'm trying.
I know what you're trying to do.
Yes.
All right, well, it will. Pressure is on, yes. All right. I'm recording. All right, now get the Zoom sharing
We're
screen.
very excited, Mike, because you said that this is the best one so far.
This is the best one, period, I think. I'll let you be the judge.
Okay.
This one I have done a lot of research on.
Good.
Okay, Linda is joining. Are you able to see the presentation now out in Zoom land?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good to check.
Come a bit closer. No problem.
And- Well, I'm going to go ahead and get going. And if you guys out here see somebody else beep in, let me know. Okay. If you were here at church on Sunday, you'll get to see the same teaser that I'm going to give right now. So Vatican City, okay? And I need to update the date. This is still current in 2023, okay? Vatican City is an independent nation. It's the smallest country in the world. Population of about 1,000 people. 0.17 square miles in size. Has anybody ever gone to the Vatican and walked around? Okay.
Yep.
Yep. Pretty small. Okay. What you see is pretty much the whole thing. The form of government of Vatican City is described as an absolute monarchy, ecclesiastical and elective theocracy. Okay. And we all know
That's a lot of big words, huh?
yes. For a big man, right? Because
Yeah.
the head of government of Vatican City is none other than the Pope, right?
We used to call that a benevolent dictatorship in the military.
Okay, well, they have a much more highfalutin term for it in the Catholic. but it means the same thing. Vatican City is not a member of the UN, but the Pope has observer status at the UN. The Vatican City mints their own coins, prints their own stamps, and has a bank. If you use the ATM for the Vatican Bank, you have to know Latin, which is kind of cool. And they do host foreign embassies, but the country is too small to house them. So they have to live somewhere in Rome. And my dream job would be U.S. ambassador to Vatican City. This is a picture I had taken with Pope Francis a few years ago. So have you ever wondered why, how Vatican City came to be its own country, how it is that the Pope is not just a spiritual leader of 1 billion Catholics worldwide, but actually ruler of his own country? Has anybody ever wondered that other than me? Fred? Okay. Well, you're going to find out tonight. So we've got 2 objectives in this course, which is going to last 3 weeks. Number 1, how did the popes become temporal rulers in addition to spiritual leaders? Okay. And how the papacy resurrected the Roman Empire and created the medieval ideal of government. So we got a lot going on in the next 3 weeks. All right, so we're going to go back in time to about 750 AD. All right, and in our class, we've got 4 major players that we're going to talk about. The Byzantine, also known as the Roman Empire, and I'm going to talk about that name in just a minute. So we got the Byzantine Empire. We've got a barbarian tribe called the Lombards. We, of course, have the papacy, and we have another barbarian tribe called the Franks. So those are our 4 players, and we're going to talk about each of them before we get into the story. So let's talk about the empire, first of all, right? Remember in our classes that we taught on history's turning point and the fall of the Roman Empire, right? In the later period of the Roman Empire was often divided, and there were multiple emperors operating at once with different spheres of authority. So in 395, it was divided in half, really for the last time. So we had the Western Roman Empire with its capital at various places, sometimes Rome, sometimes Milan, sometimes Ravenna, sometimes even up in what is now France, in what the Romans called Gaul. The eastern half of the Roman Empire had its capital in the city of Constantinople, right? That's where Constantine built what he called New Rome, right? But that people immediately started calling Constantine's city, Constantinople. Yeah.
Remind me again where Ravenna is.
Ravenna is on the northeast coast of Italy, and it plays an important part in our story. So we'll have more maps with Ravenna. Constantinople is right here in that little isthmus of land or peninsula of land, I should say, where the entryway to the Black Sea is located. Okay, it's on the European side of that divide. And when Constantine founded his new capital, there was an existing city there called Byzantium. Okay? It was a Greek city, but Constantine recognized the military advantages of that site, and so he chose that to turn Byzantium into his capital. And so that's where we get the name Byzantine Empire from. The eastern half of the Roman Empire, historians now call the Byzantine Empire, but people back then wouldn't know what you're talking about if you use that term, okay? They considered it to just be the Roman Empire. Yes, the eastern half of it, but the Roman Empire that had been chugging along since the days of Augustus.
Real quick, someone's at the door, at the south door. I don't know if it's someone waiting to join your class.
Thanks, Tim. So remember, in the 400s, what we learned in the Hall of Rome class was that in the 400s, we had all these different barbarian tribes invading the Roman Empire. And the western half of the Roman Empire was dismembered over the course of the 400s. So we get these barbarian successor states that take the place of what was the Roman Empire. Remember, we had the Vandals, we had the Goths, okay? The Franks and the Lombards are latecomers to the, hey, Joseph, latecomers to this party, okay? And the last emperor in the West was deposed in the year 476 AD. That was a guy named Romulus Augustulus, who had one of those great ironic names that makes you think God has a sense of humor by putting the last emperor in the West, giving Romulus Augustulus, because Romulus was the legendary founder of Rome, and Augustus was the founder of the empire. Oops. There you want to turn. Here we go. Okay. So again, the western half of the Roman Empire gets carved up into these barbarian successor states. And importantly, none of these barbarian kings ever dares to take the title of emperor, okay? The Romans occasionally give them an honorific called patrician, which is kind of the second highest rank you can achieve, but never emperor, okay? And again, in the East never fell. The East just keeps chugging along and will for 1,000 years. There will be a Roman Empire until the 1400s, okay? So historians call it the Byzantine Empire, but again, when I use that term, understand that people back then wouldn't have recognized that term, and it really means the Roman Empire, okay? All right, so that's the empire. The Lombards are one of the barbarian tribes that figures heavily into our story, okay? They, one of the barbarian successor kingdoms in Italy. They had invaded Italy in 568 AD. So again, they were kind of latecomers to feasting on the carcass of the Western Roman Empire. And they were Catholic Christians. You may be wondering about this picture here, okay? So, great story about the Lombards to give you kind of a flavor for the barbarian tribe that they are, okay? So, in the period when they were invading Italy, and so they were still totally barbarian in outlook, there was a Lombard king, and he was fighting one of his rivals who happened to be his father-in-law. And so he kills his father-in-law, and then being a barbarian king, he has his father-in-law's skull turned into a goblet, okay? And he makes his wife drink out of the top of her father's skull, okay? She wasn't too happy about this. So she got one of the king's guards on her side and had this guy assassinated in revenge, okay? So these are the Lombards, okay? They are a truly barbarian tribe, but Catholic Christians. And this picture here, to show you how Catholic they were, they had a famous crown called the Iron Crown. And you can kind of see in the middle at the jewels and the gold on the outside, but in the middle, you've got this band. This band of iron was, according to their legend, was hammered out of one of the nails that was used in Christ's crucifixion. And according to their legend, Constantine the Great had given them one of these nails in gratitude for support that they gave him when he was fighting other barbarian tribes. So whether it's true or not, they were Christians and they revered their Christian objects just like any other people in Western Europe. All right, so in 750 AD, when our story starts, the Lombards only hold parts of Italy, okay? And on this map, you can kind of see these beige parts. The beige parts of Italy is what the Lombards control. And this little kind of purple dumbbell shape in the middle, that is what the Roman Empire still controls, okay? So even though the Western provinces had been lost in the 400s, in the 500s, an emperor in Constantinople decided he was going to reconquer what had been lost to the barbarians. And so he invaded Italy and was able to take back this much of it, okay? So this little piece of Italy is ruled by the emperor, but because he's so far away, right, and he's separated from Italy by a whole bunch of enemy territory, he has a local governor. And the local governor makes his capital in the city of Ravenna, up there on the northeastern coast. This local governor is called the exarch. And so this little strip of land that is imperial territory is called the Exarchate of Ravenna, okay? Now, importantly, at the bottom end of the Exarchate of Ravenna is the city of Rome, okay? So Rome is in imperial territory in 750 AD. But importantly, Rome, which gives its name to the Roman Empire, in 750 AD, not only is Rome not the capital of the Roman Empire, Rome is not even the capital of Italy, right? They're taking orders from some guy up in Ravenna. And that's going to factor into our story a little bit. So remember, the Lombards had invaded Italy in 568 AD. So by 750, the Lombards and the empire have been at war with one another off and on for about 2 centuries. What the Lombard king wants to do is he wants to gain control of all of Italy, because this strip of land controlled by the empire is separating him from a couple of Lombard dukes who control that southern part of Italy. And because he can't enforce his will on them, right? He can't march an army across imperial territory. These Lombard dukes in the south are basically autonomous, okay? And the Lombard king's goal is to bridge that gap so he can firmly control all of Italy. All right, so now the papacy. What is it that makes the papacy special in 750 AD? They are considered by Western Christians in particular to be the successors of Peter. And St. Peter, according to the Bible, has a special place. He is Jesus's chosen successor, if you will, the person chosen that Jesus chose to run his church. In the book of Matthew, chapter 16, verse 19, Jesus says to Peter, after asking all of his followers, "Who do you think I am?" And it's Peter who raises his hand and says, "You're the Messiah, the Son of God." And Jesus says, bingo, right? It's not you speaking this, Peter, it is God speaking for you. And in fact, it wasn't Peter he was talking to at that time, it was a guy named Simon. And Jesus gives Simon a new nickname, Peter, which in Greek means what? Anybody? The rock. You are the rock. And he says, and upon this rock, I will build my church. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And whatever you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will have been loosed in heaven. So through the concept of apostolic succession, wherein every bishop, when they're consecrated, has other bishops who lay their hands on him and transmit to him their episcopal authority, the popes say, because Peter was the guy who founded the church in Rome, because Peter was assassinated here in Rome, all the subsequent bishops of Rome are the heirs of St. Peter. We are the heirs of Peter's power. We are the people who today hold the keys to the kingdom of heaven. We decide who gets into heaven and who doesn't. So in the West, most Christians bought into this theory, okay? They believed that the Pope is the heir of the successor of St. Peter, and he fully wields Peter's authority. But in the East, Christians never bought into this idea of papal primacy or papal supremacy, right? Remember, Christianity had started in the East, and there were ancient churches just as old as Rome in places like Antioch, which the book of Acts tells us is the first place where they used the word Christians, okay? In the city of Alexandria, in the city of Jerusalem, right? Much older churches. So they don't view Rome the way Christians in the West view Rome. And they never accepted that the Pope was the head of the church. And that's why today we have Roman Catholicism, which reveres the Pope, but you've got all these Eastern Orthodox churches which do not, okay? And they're just as old as the Catholic Church. In 750 AD, the Pope's main rival in the East is the Patriarch of Constantinople. Now, of course, that church doesn't have the pedigree that Antioch or Jerusalem or Rome has, but it has going for it the fact that it is the capital of the empire, okay? And for that reason, we've got a big rivalry between the Bishop of Rome, right, who's claiming to be the heir of St. Peter, but living in what is now considered kind of a backwater. It's not even the capital of Italy anymore, versus the guy who heads the church in the same city where the emperor lives. So, papal problems, 750 AD. We've got Lombards north and south, right? On this map, you can kind of see that the exarchate is squeezed in this vice, right? It's this little skinny sliver of land with Lombards on both sides. And the citizens of the empire despised the Lombards, right? The guys who drank out of the chalice made out of somebody's skull, okay? They despised them as unwashed barbarians. And in fact, they have been putting out a rumor that the Lombards themselves are sprung from the stinking race of lepers, okay? Now, of course, there's nothing dirtier than a leper, right? Even in biblical times, right? They talk about how it was a big deal when Jesus met with the lepers, right? That was stunning to people back then, that you would actually interact with lepers. So to say that somebody is sprung from the stinking race of lepers is the worst aspersion you can cast. That's what the Romans think of the Lombards. And that's why they don't want to be conquered or ruled by the Lombards, even though the Lombards, as we've seen, are good Christians, right? They've got the Iron Crown made out of one of the nails from Jesus's crucifixion. So the Pope should be able to count on his imperial overlord for protection, right? That's the emperor's job. He's in charge of the exarchate of Ravenna. But there are three problems with this. Number one, the emperor resides a really long way away, okay? Secondly, the emperor is facing two more immediate and more serious military threats. The biggest threat is the Arabs. Muhammad was born in 570 AD, and in the 600s, when he started to get his prophecies and started to unite the tribes in Arabia, it just suddenly exploded. They took over all of Arabia, all of North Africa, and in the 700s, they even took over Spain. And the Muslims will rule Spain until the 1400s, okay? More immediately for him, they've already lost this part of the Eastern Roman Empire, but now they're coming after kind of the last core of the Eastern Roman Empire. They're on the border there in Turkey, taking territory. So he's constantly dealing with incursions from the Arabs, the Muslims, and within living memory, the Muslims had actually attacked Constantinople itself and tried to take the capital. It's a very real, serious threat. This is a major, major power in the Muslims. The other threat is a little bit newer, but it's on the opposite flank, and it's closer to Constantinople. It's a barbarian tribe called the Bulgars, okay? Who are going to give their name to Bulgaria, okay? So the Bulgars are pressuring this part of the Roman Empire too close to Constantinople for comfort, right? And an interesting factoid about the Bulgars and Bulgaria, the kingdom that they found is the oldest continuously existing country in Europe.
Really?
Interesting factoid. So the emperor's got to deal with the Muslims on one side, the Bulgars on another. He is not worried about the Lombards over in Italy. That's a third-rate problem. There's another thing dividing the Pope from his imperial overlord, and it's a religious dispute over something called icons. Okay? An icon is just an image of Christ or something holy. Okay? And prior to 750 AD, the current emperor's father had decided that he was going to make war on icons, that icons were inconsistent with Christianity. So Emperor Leo III declares the veneration of icons to be outlawed, okay? People have wondered, why he did this. It kind of came out of the blue. And one theory is that this emperor, Leo III, had grown up right on the border with the Muslims. And the Muslims were completely against icons, any kind of image of anything smacking of religious in nature. In fact, no paintings of Muhammad can be made, their prophet, obviously no paintings of God. They even went to the extent that in this period, you couldn't depict human beings at all. If you look at the art from this period, it's all geometric type designs. In the West, icons had really kind of gotten out of control. People were carrying icons around and acting like the icon itself had spiritual power. And it was blurring the line between veneration and actual worship of these images. And of course, the Muslims have a point, right? Because in the Old Testament, it says, thou shalt not make a graven image of me, of God, right? And if Jesus is God, how can you make an icon? So this is where Leo is coming from. What triggered it may have been something as weird as a tsunami, a giant tidal wave. In 726, there was a volcanic eruption underneath the Mediterranean Sea near Constantinople. And this giant wave, tidal wave, swamped an entire tiny island. And Leo apparently took this as a sign from God, right? That something is wrong. I'm about to send another flood upon the earth if you don't mend your ways. And so Leo says, what we're doing wrong is venerating icons. So the first thing he does, and again, this is kind of out of the blue, he orders the destruction of a statue of Christ that sits atop the gate to his own palace in Constantinople. It's called the Chalke icon. And so he's got guys up there, workmen, who are up there trying to take down this really famous, really prominent statue there in the city of Constantinople. And a crowd sees what these guys are doing, and they think that they're doing something unauthorized, and they actually attack and kill these workmen, okay? Thinking that they're protecting the icon. And this really kind of gives you an idea of how Leo's war on icons is going to be received. It's a very unpopular policy. And in fact, the papacy in the West, when they hear about it, the Pope sends a delegation to Constantinople to object and to try and correct the emperor in the error of his ways. And the emperor throws the papal delegation in jail. And to punish the Pope for daring to defy him, he actually strips away some of the territories that are theoretically under the Pope's control and gives those territories to the Patriarch of Constantinople, the Pope's arch rival. So we get to 750 AD. Leo's son is now emperor, and Leo's son is Constantine V. He's the fifth guy to be named Constantine and be emperor. And he is just as much of an iconoclast as his father was, maybe even worse. And he's so popular among the people that they give him the nickname Copronymus, which in Greek means, I'm going to translate it delicately here, poop name, okay? You can guess what a non-G-rated version of that might be. So they call their emperor poop name, okay? And they spread a story to discredit him that when he was a baby and he was being baptized, he pooped in the baptismal font. And that this was a omen, a harbinger of what kind of a disastrous rule he was going to have. And of course, it's all come true, right? He's an iconoclast, okay? You're gonna listen to a guy who took a dump on the baptismal font when it comes to icons? Get out of here. So in the West, the Pope is viewed as a champion by the Italians against this heretical foreign overlord, okay? And what we have, starting with Leo III, is parts of Italy actually rebel against the empire and say, we're not going to give our allegiance to the empire anymore. We're going to be an independent city. Well, they come to their senses, right? Because they're not going to be able to stand up to the Lombards. But by 750 AD, we've got a situation where the Pope is relying on the emperor to protect him from the Lombards, but that emperor is both distracted by other military threats, and he's estranged from his subjects over this concept of icons. So, what's a pope to do? Fortunately for the Pope, what's going to happen is that the most powerful barbarian tribe in Europe is going to come knocking, asking for a favor. This tribe is the Franks. So as you can see from this map, the Franks control a humongous piece of territory. Aquitaine is actually part of the Frankish kingdom. We're going to talk about why it's a different color in a minute, okay? But the Franks control pretty much all of what is now France, all of Belgium, all of the Netherlands, much of what is now Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. Most of Europe north of the Alps, okay? Very powerful tribe. They are ruled by a dynasty called the Merovingians. And I'm going to talk about the name in just a minute. But by 750 AD, there's a very strange situation going on in the Frankish kingdom and the Merovingian dynasty. The Merovingians are called by historians, French historians use the term the Roi Fainéant, which translates into English as the do-nothing kings. Real power is wielded by an official of the Merovingian king called the mayor of the palace, which in Latin is major domo, right? If you ever heard that term, my major domo, my second in command, well, this is where it comes from. So real power, at some point in the history of the Merovingians, we had a couple Merovingian kings who were too weak or too incompetent to rule, and they let their mayor of the palace rule in their place, and that just became the norm. And then what happens is that the office of mayor of the palace itself becomes hereditary. So we've got a hereditary family called the Arnulfings, because of the first mayor of their family named Arnulf, who controls the mayorship. So it's kind of like you've got an upper tier of the monarchy and then a second tier of the monarchy, except there's a very big difference between the Merovingians and the Arnulfings. Probably the most famous, the most powerful of all the mayors of the palace is a guy named Charles Martel. Okay, Martel is a nickname. In the ancient French language, it means the hammer, because he is a warlord par excellence. And in fact, Charles Martel is most famous for a battle he fought in the year 732 AD in the city of Tours, France, kind of up north near Paris, the Muslims who had controlled Spain for 20 years at this point decided we're going to try to conquer the rest of Europe. So they invaded, and it was Charles Martel who turned back, repulsed this Muslim invasion of Europe, and in some people's interpretation, basically saved Europe from becoming Muslim, okay? It's possible that if it weren't for Charles Martel, we could all be spending this class in a mosque right now instead of in a church. So Charles Martel is so powerful that when his Merovingian puppet king dies, he doesn't even bother to have a new Merovingian crowned. Basically, he just keeps issuing charters in the name of his dead king. But when we get to 750 AD, Charles is dead, and he has left the office to two of his sons. The kingdom is divided between two of his sons, Pepin the Short and Carloman. And they have found that they don't have the bona fides that Charles Martel does. They haven't defeated the Muslims in battle. So they find it necessary to put a Merovingian back on the throne. So what is it about the Merovingians that makes them so special? Why didn't the mayors of the palace simply take the throne for themselves? Well, the Merovingians have this mystique about them that the Franks feel like they can't have any other family rule them. Going back to the beginning of the Merovingian dynasty, it's named for a shadowy, possibly legendary king named Merovec, who, if he lived, probably would have been king about 450 AD. So 300 years of Merovingians, okay? And according to legend, Merovec was, his mother was a Frankish woman who went bathing in the ocean, and she was impregnated by this creature called the Quinotar. The Quinotar is half bull and half fish, and he has 5 horns, okay? So very strange legend, all right? Now, this is not unusual in the Germanic kingdoms, right? And the Franks are one of the Germanic peoples. It's very common for the royal family to cook up a genealogy that shows that they were descended from some pagan god, like Woden or Thor, okay? But the Merovingians have this crazy Quinotar thing, okay? Which the Franks believe, okay? What sets a Merovingian apart from his people is that the Merovingians never cut their hair, whereas the Franks are not allowed to let their hair grow beyond a certain length, okay? People at the time and historians since have called the Merovingians the long-haired kings, okay? Because they've got this distinctive feature. So for whatever reason, the Franks will not suffer to be ruled by anybody other than a Merovingian because they're descended from the Quinotar, okay? And even when the Merovingians are incapable of rule, right, you still have to have a Merovingian on the throne. One of Charles Martel's ancestors, one of the previous mayors of the palace, had actually tried to make himself king. He said, this is crazy. I've got the real power. This guy's nothing but a figurehead. So he deposed the king and took the throne for himself, and the Franks killed him. So when Charles Martel, as powerful as he was, even after he had defeated the Muslims and saved Europe for Christianity, when his Merovingian king died, even Charles Martel did not dare to take the throne, okay? Remember, he didn't replace the Merovingian, but he kept issuing charters in the name of the dead king, okay? And that was as close as anybody had successfully come to replacing the Merovingians. So now we get to 750 AD, and we've got Charles's two sons, Pepin and Carloman, who have inherited the throne, and they are ruling the Frankish Empire. A couple of things to understand about the Franks, and keep this in mind for later on. The Franks have had friendly relations with the Lombards. In fact, after Charles Martel fought the Battle of Tours, he went on the offensive against the Muslims who controlled this little strip of land in southern Gaul, in the south of France. And so he started attacking the Muslims, trying to drive them across the Pyrenees back into Spain. And in that effort, he was aided by the Lombards. Okay, so they're brothers in arms against the Muslims. And they had forged such a bond that when young Pepin, Charles Martel's son, when young Pepin came of age, and it was time to invest him with his arms and show that he was a warrior, that he was a man, okay? This is the equivalent of his bar mitzvah, maybe. When he's invested with arms, Charles Martel gives that honor to the Lombard king. He sends Pepin to the Lombards to be invested with arms, okay? And importantly, the papacy had actually reached out to Charles Martel during his reign and said, hey, would you be our ally? The emperor is really not doing his job here and we need a friend against the Lombards. Charles Martel said, no, the Lombards are my friends. I'm not getting involved in Italian politics. So the situation for Pepin is different. A few years before 750 AD, something very strange happened. Remember, Charles Martel had bequeathed the Frankish kingdom to two of his sons, Pepin and Carloman. And they worked together, trying to keep the empire going. And then suddenly, Carloman decided, I'm giving it all up. I'm going to become a monk. 747 AD, Carloman puts aside the highest position in the Frankish kingdom and leaves to enter a monastery. But he has left behind him some young sons. We also have a third character, a guy named Griffo, who was half-brother of Pepin and Carloman. He was a son of Charles Martel. And when Charles Martel died, Pepin and Carloman, who had the same mother and the same father, teamed up against their half-brother, who had a different mother than them. They teamed up against Griffo because he thought the kingdom should be divided into 3 instead of into 2. So they captured him, they put him in jail, and it's not clear whether Charles Martel had written Griffo out of the will or whether it was Pepin and Carloman who wrote him out of the will, okay? But it doesn't matter. They teamed up against him. They put him in jail. He actually escaped and tried to make himself king of Bavaria and to lead a secession of Bavaria from the Frankish kingdom. Pepin and Carloman captured him again, put him in jail, but now in 750 AD, Griffo has escaped again. And he's making trouble elsewhere in the Frankish Empire. So Pepin has a couple of threats to his power from inside his own family. First of all, he's got these kids of his brother Carloman who are claiming their share of the inheritance. And Pepin is like, the last thing I need is to share power with a couple of snot-nosed children, okay? And he's got his half-brother who's stirring up problems. And from Pepin's standpoint, the Merovingian puppet king has become a real liability. Because if the sons of Carloman or Griffo could capture the Merovingian puppet king, they could issue charters in his name saying the real mayor of the palace is Griffo, not Pepin, or the real mayor of the palace is Carloman's sons, not Pepin. So the Merovingian king has become a pretext for rebellion. So Pepin decides, I've got to get rid of the Merovingians. I have to become king myself. But how do you do that? How do you get past the Merovingian mystique, right? This crazy belief in the magical power of their long hair and their descent from the Quinotar, right? The people buy into this stuff. And there's only one authority in Western Europe that could possibly outrank this superstition: St. Peter. So Pepin decides to send an inquiry to the Pope. And his inquiry says, Bishop Burkhard, this is from the Frankish Royal Annals, okay, so a court history written a few years later. Bishop Burkhard and Chaplain Fulrad were sent to the Pope to inquire whether it was good or not that the kings of the Franks should wield no real power. So, the papacy has a dilemma here. Number one, the papacy understands that they need political stability. They want a strong king because when there's chaos, when you've got a bunch of little warlords making war on each other all the time, who gets hurt? It's the church and the peasants, right? So the church really likes political stability, and they don't want to willy-nilly overturn the natural order of things, the political order. But of course, as we've seen, the Pope has a more immediate problem, right? The Pope really needs an ally against the Lombards, right? Can't turn to the emperor, right? The iconoclast poop name, right? Who is going to help defend us against the Lombards? Well, the Franks. So, according to those same Frankish royal annals, the Pope instructed Pepin that it was better to call him king who had the royal power than the one who did not. He commanded by virtue of his apostolic authority that Pepin should be made king. The Pope has commanded by virtue of his apostolic authority that Pepin should be made king. Check and mate, Merovingians. So back in the Frankish Empire, we have an elaborate ceremony wherein the Merovingian king, the long-haired king, is ceremonially shorn of his locks. His hair is cut, and in a Frankish belief, once his hair has been cut, he can no longer rule. So he is shorn, he's actually tonsured, okay, and sent to a monastery. In the second phase of the ceremony, Pepin is elected king in the ancient Germanic fashion, meaning all of the important warriors of the Frankish kingdom are gathered around and they acclaim him king. And after they shout and acclaim him king, several of these warriors take a shield, they put Pepin on it, and they raise him up and they carry him around. Okay. And this is a ceremony that the Roman historians who have observed the Germanic tribes have described as happening for hundreds of years. It's an ancient, ancient thing. But something new happens. In addition to this ancient Germanic pagan ceremony of being raised on his shield, because he was declared king by the Pope in his apostolic authority, something new happens when Pepin is made king. A bishop anoints Pepin king with holy oil. This is a ceremony taken straight out of the pages of the Old Testament, right? When the Israelites said they wanted a king, God said to his priest, Samuel, you will find the man and show who he is by anointing him with oil. And so for the first time in Frankish history, we have a Christian element being introduced into the coronation ceremony. For the first time, really in any Western political office, no Roman emperor has ever been anointed. No Lombard king has ever been anointed. It's never been a Christian ceremony. The church has never had a role in the coronation of a king, but now they do. And from this point forward, the church is going to have a role in who gets to be king and who doesn't get to be king. So right there, we have a double revolution happening when Pepin becomes king of the Franks. He's overthrown the Merovingian dynasty, but the church has insinuated itself into this secular ceremony and changed the nature of kingship fundamentally. So next week, we will talk about what happens when the Pope calls in his marker, right? That Pepin probably didn't even realize he had bought into and accepted the Pope's command that he become. Any questions about what I covered tonight?
Yeah, one about the Monrovians. I seem to remember a tie between them and a Knights Templar or the Masonic order.
You know, the Merovingians, obviously, there are people who claim to be the rightful kings of France. They claim to be Merovingian in blood, but it's impossible to prove, right? Because there's no good, family trees that exist from that time. But yes, you're right, that it's a kind of a shadowy idea. If you ever read the book Holy Blood, Holy Grail, or the Da Vinci Code, that whole story about, Jesus had descendants and they became the Merovingians, basically, is what what the story is there. So they are the subject of a lot of lore, but in real history, Tim, they disappear from the pages of history. Well, thank you guys for turning out tonight. I hope you found this interesting enough to tune back in a week from now. We will continue the story and see exactly how it comes to pass that the Pope gets to rule his own kingdom.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that.
Okay, we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
You bet.
Bye.
He's good.
No, Linda.